So,
I mean, we don't have to start now, but I'm just hitting. I'm just going
no,
to.
it's fine. Yeah. Well, that's the point of being able to edit, is you can take this and
Right.
take out what you don't want and leave in what you do want. So,
Okay. Well, let me just say at this point, it's great to be here this afternoon and spending a little bit of time with one of my dearest friends and a colleague in the United Church who has exercised leadership around all sorts of matters in the time I've known him and long before. He's I'm not going to go through his CV. I guess I don't know it all, but I know enough of it to know him as a musician, as a pastor, as a bureaucrat within the national workings of our United Church of Canada, and also, well, as a consultant, just as a man of imagination and creativity, and somebody who sort of gets that weird connect between some of the big issues of the day and the big theological reflection that is at the heart of our work and denomination and our faith journeys. And that specific piece that seems to be so important right now around technology and how we live into this time and find our way around this, like the specifics of technological opportunities, but also how we hit the wall. And I think every Zoom gathering, every gathering that any of us have been part of since middle of March, apart from the big drama of the moment, we're all kind of scratching our heads about how we're connecting with one another and how we're experiencing technology. Joe, you've been doing this and thinking about this since I first connected with you back in the early 1990s, and you were doing a really bold thing at the time, helping folks in the faith community relate to something called the World Wide Web that was sort of a brand new thing. And I remember cold calling a number, and I think it was you or somebody on your staff at that point who helped me connect up for the first time with the internet when I was in my settlement charge in rural New Brunswick in somewhere in the early 1990s. So hey man, it's great to be here. Thanks for being here with me.
thanks for doing this. It's fun.
Yeah, it's good to be together. So Joe, I know you're at home in Napanee.
That's right.
You're doing this. I want to ask you about the distant past, but I guess maybe start with this moment. Where are you at around? What are you up to these days in terms of your leadership and that whole mix of faith and technology?
So I worked in the general counsel office until 2015. At that point, I ventured out to be just more independent and more, kind of an ad hoc way of being present and supporting people in the church, throughout the church, and as I was needed and where I felt called, where I felt I was needed. And so that led me into this kind of consulting approach, working somewhat with the Edge network in the United Church, but a lot just independently as well. And just responding to things that seemed interesting to me, challenges with congregations, both in visioning and development, and also just troubleshooting and problem solving sometimes. But I think the thing I realized, particularly recently, that everything I've done in the church and outside of the church for the last 35 years has been about in some way helping people be better at communicating with each other. So it's been all around communication. Nice. And not like not communication like involved in journalism or running a publishing company or something. Not providing necessarily a media or medium for communicating, but helping folks figure out better ways of communicating, more effective ways, more efficient ways, more honest ways of communicating with each other. And so that is taking me down a number of paths. Counseling. I've got counseling, pastoral education, supervised pastoral education units and worked in psychiatric hospital, helping but it's always been about communicating. It's always been with counseling. It's always been about helping people hear each other and understand each other, and be more in tune with one another, so that their relationship is enhanced, is improved by that. So that's sort of spread from that individual, one-on-one, individual to individual level, to the communal and corporate kind of level of communication, which is all about preaching and worship and running good meetings, in churches. It led me into developing in the early 90s a company that pre-internet, and certainly popularization of the internet, we ran a system, a network that enabled church people and people in other not-for-profit organizations connect with each other and communicate more effectively.
Yep. Yeah.
So and that's where I think we connected with you and your settlement charge way back in those days. So and then of course that's led me into other ways more recently, the art of hosting, which is a more organic and more in-person way of helping people communicate with each other by bringing people together into groups, and then using methods and strategies that help people express themselves, identify what their needs are, what's in their imagination, what their goals are. And so I've worked with a number of congregations over these last 5 years, using those tools, those techniques like World Cafe and Open Space and circle conversations, and just facilitating the communication between people. And
if I may, you were really, that was pivotal for me when I came to the church I'm currently serving, Mackay. That process, like engaging with you and Alan around that process, and the work the conference we attended in Kingston, but also that then you worked with us, and just sussing out some of those questions was so helpful. I recall when you and I were chatting with that, at that time, you mentioned like some of the big, those Art of Hosting and World Cafe events that you guys had been part of, where, it wasn't simply a congregation of the United Church of Canada in some pocket. It was like labor unions for British Columbia, or international not-for-profits like across the globe. Is that, you were part of some of those as well, right?
Yeah, so those kinds of large numbers of people being able to identify what matters to them as a collective, and then being able to synthesize and understand and dive into that, and come to some kind of forward movement out of that conversation. That's a very difficult thing to do normally with large numbers of people. And so some of the methodologies then that that I discovered and was part of actually enabled very large.
And we froze up.
Groups, over
hey,
100
man.
people gathered together in trying to understand what the commonality is among them, and where to go with that. So
Right. There
we're
was a little hiccup there for a second, but then you bounced back fine.
Yeah.
So that whole, I love when you tell that story. It reminds me of that quote, I think, from Kierkegaard, where we all live our lives forward, but we see the shape of things in reverse. I think that's how it goes,
Mm-hmm.
something like that. Like your entire ministry, and if I may, like your professional life has been then centered around, like, I love the fact that there's an arcing theme going back 35 years.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's been, some. I'd love to hear about some of the frustrations along the way. But I guess one of the things I'm really curious about is thinking about all of that arc when we get locked down in mid-March. Where does that put you? Or where do you land?
So the other, the other thing that I'm doing right now is working also part-time, which is unusual because I haven't done this in probably 20 years, but I'm working part-time in a community of faith in a congregation. And so that's where I happen to be, strangely enough, as unusual as it was for me, to be serving as one of the ministers, one of the pastors in a United Church in Kingston. And so
Edith Rankin, right?
Edith Rankin Memorial.
Yeah,
Church.
one of the signature congregations
Yeah.
in our denomination.
Yeah, it's a great congregation to be part of right now. But I had already, because of my interest in finding effective ways for people to communicate, I had already, from the general counsel position in Toronto, working with the denomination right throughout the country, I had already developed some ways of helping task groups and committees do their work remotely or from a distance. So I had already been using what people are now seem to be discovering, Zoom and video conferencing and online collaboration tools. I'd been using those for the last 5 years, and really right back to those early 90s when we were networking those not-for-profit organizations and churches.
Do you roll your eyes when all the rest of us are jumping on board? Are you just kind of rolling your eyes about this at this point?
No, not really, but it's interesting to watch as people try to play catch up. For what I consider to be like a 30-year journey of finding effective technologies and other tools, as well. And so I was well positioned, at Edith Rankin Memorial to assist them in moving immediately into shifting into small group ministry and administrative work and worship, being in an online but interactive format. I mean, my concern was that we not lose the relationships, as I was mentioning earlier. That's been my primary focus. Communication is inseparable from the understanding that my passion in my ministry has been about helping human beings be in more authentic and richer and deeper relationship with each other in order to build a better world. I mean, and communication is kind of the
I think we should just slice that out and make that the header for this whole chat. What you just said. Yeah. Okay.
So for me, worship is a relational thing. It's not entertainment. It's different than going to a theater and simply being entertained with a show or a performance. People go to church to be with their friends and to feel compassion for one another as they tell their stories about what's going on in their lives as they're drinking coffee afterwards. And it's about the minister looking out over the congregation and knowing those people and then speaking to them a word of God in that moment. It's not just about entertainment. And so my concern was, how do I take the tools that I have and what I know and enable that? And so we've focused, and this isn't for everyone. Not everyone is in this position or sees it this way, but for me and for this congregation, it seemed important to be able to continue that relational presence. So we had last Sunday, we had about 15 women involved in presenting worship online, interactively, with 140 participants online. So this wasn't something they watched on YouTube afterwards. It was 140 people engaged in reacting to and responding to. We went into small groups and had a conversation that these 15 women had created called, the question was, what brings color into your life and what drains color from your life? Wow. And so the congregation, in little groups of 7 or 8 people, spent 10 minutes talking with each other about those questions. So that really made me feel as though, the particular toolkit and perspective that I currently have had some value to this congregation, in creating that, making that happen.
Yeah, I mean, I hear there's a sophistication to your overview of things. I mean, part of many of us, myself included, we're literally just hustling from week to week, trying to figure out what might work, and some of it's really landed and felt quite powerful. And but I hear some discernment in your, like, in how you assess things, and that's led to something quite unique at Edith Rankin. Is it something shareable? Like, could I see it, or is it just something that lives in the moment for the simply for the
Well,
140 people?
it's kind of both and. Like a real in-person, face-to-face worship service on a Sunday morning. It lives in that moment. So there is a real time. The time has come. The time has passed. In that moment. But we do record it, and we do then edit it and put it into a version of it, just not the interactive components, but just the content of it. We do make that available for those who are just simply not able to participate. And that's for us just a more way of broadening the circle and making sure that folks are included, recognizing that the better option is for them to be able to be there in the moment as well. But and I'm not in any way, dissing any other approaches to this. I think I was on a video call, United in Learning presentation 6 weeks or so ago with Catherine McLean from Edmonton. And one of the things I recall us saying in that is that the most important thing right now is that churches stop, take a pause, and ask themselves, what is our best practice? What is it that we do well as a congregation? What is it that defines us and makes us, what is our gift as a congregation? And how can we then carry on to, in some way, to live out that gift? And that may be pastoral care. It may be that the congregation, needs to use the good old technology, communication technology of the telephone, and make sure that people are phoning each other up. Maybe for some people it might be every day, that they receive a phone call in the loneliness of their isolation from somebody in that congregation that says, wondering how you're doing today. It might be that, not pastor, it might be that preaching is the primary, the strength of that congregation, in which case, great, the minister can put a 45-minute sermon on YouTube and people can participate in that. So I think churches need to ask themselves, what is it that we do best as a community of faith? What is it that defines us? What is our gift? What's our spiritual gift? And then ask themselves the question, okay, what kind of technology do we need to serve that need and to be available to us to enable us to continue to be the church in this moment? So for me, it's not a one model versus another model, one technology versus a different technology. It's just a matter of like any missional question, which is, what is it we need to do right now, and what do we need to learn in order to do that? Because there's a big learning curve when anything changes, right? And when you transition, that's a learning time. And so people need to learn, as you've said that you have in your congregation, you need to learn to do something differently. But that doesn't mean suddenly doing different things necessarily, although different things might be good. It may be that there's some growth in that, but it also means continuing to be authentic, to continue to live out of your own integrity as a congregation as best you can. For me, that's important to see that happening, and to see. So if somebody phones me up and says, what technology should we be using for something? I say, well, I don't know. Tell me what you do. Tell me who you are as a congregation. Like what kind of a congregation are you? Let's talk about that first, and then we'll figure out whether there's some technology that will help you live into that. So
Lovely. Does that that conversation you had with Catherine suggests that if a congregation can identify its particular gifts or spirit, or whatever, however you want to term that, sharing those gifts seems to be there seems to be a freedom right now around sharing these gifts with one another. I've always felt free and collaborative, but my recent experience here in Ottawa with the 7 churches that we're partnering with, has just reminded me how deep, how little I've been actually functionally collaborating in some respects, and
Mhm.
I don't know, even especially with other congregations, other clergy, and realizing that that in this moment it's not that hard. It's actually quite easy, and it sort of reinforces that I bring something to the table, and you bring something to the table. So I guess what I'm really hearing is a huge moment, as you and Catherine were talking about, like in terms of being able to access these gifts across the country.
Yeah, I think that, there's certainly challenges in living in a pandemic, and there's going to be a lot of hardship that's going to be with us for a long time as a result of this happening in the world. But there are also, I think, some folks who are starting to look at it and say, what are we learning? What new things are coming out of this that we hope will continue even when we're through the hard part of it. What are some of the things that we are discovering? For example, this is a bit off our core focus here, but in Quebec, there has, it's been in particular with the Army being involved in helping in nursing homes, it's come to light at how badly we've been doing at treating our aging population as citizens, as citizens of this country, and as members of society, how badly we've done at caring for those who end up in homes for the aged. And I hope that that learning that comes from that will change the way we do that. So in the same way, I think this is happening with us in the church as well. I think we're discovering a level of collaboration, a level of sharing of resources and skills and talent that maybe will have some longevity. It would be great, because I agree with you. I think we are discovering a different collaborative spirit. Maybe it's because we feel like we're all in the same boat to some degree. Maybe it's because we recognize immediately that there are skills and gifts and resources that we simply don't have, and we need to reach out. But I do think there is an increased level of cooperation, collaboration that's emerged on some fronts, and it would be great if that could carry on.
Yeah, just to see how that would carry on and inspire whatever post-pandemic looks like.
It's ironic that in the United Church that we both serve, there are actually more people that are viewing or attending worship services now than there were before the pandemic. So we've got more people engaged in connecting in some capacity. There's a little church north of Napanee here that has they're pretty advanced. They've got a pastor there that is very progressive in terms of both technology and just his imagination. But they have, their congregation of, I don't know, let's say 100 people. But they have been putting together a really fine broadcast worship service, and are getting 350 or 400 people viewing that every week, whereas they had 100 people at church on Sunday mornings prior to that, right? So that's like a fourfold increase in people that are connected, to their congregation worship experience in some way. Now it's different, and it will be different a year from now again. That's just this kind of stories that I'm hearing, that we're actually, ironically, more people are making a connection to the United Church of Canada in terms of worship than there were showing up at the door on Sunday mornings a year ago. So.
Right. I mean, that's certainly our experience at Mackay has been that around our collaboration, and the numbers that are watching that service are it's YouTube, So you're starting, you quickly see like 300, 400, 500 people, 500
Yeah.
views. And
Yeah.
then our music and meditations also getting strangely remarkable connection, and from across the country, partly thanks to the technology nationally, where we're able to share and like and identify things that we're interested in. So suddenly things are, our thing is popping up in Nova Scotia and Alberta, and we're sharing something from somewhere else, a piece of music that somebody's done, a virtual choir, these sorts of things that are sort of part of this wheel turning. Is there a in terms of access, I guess I keep thinking about, you've raised kind of the justice or the, the political reality hitting seniors' homes or retirement homes, and just that the way that I experienced the pandemic from my point, is a fairly secure, middle-class human being with some resources behind me. And even around technology, I'm able to find you. Can you speak to that at all? I'm sure that's been part of the arc of thinking about access to communication technologies, even to, in all the incarnations down through the years. What's your sense of the justice dimension around that?
Yeah, it definitely is a technology. There isn't equal access to technology, and the lines where it divides are along those typical lines that we focus on when we think about equity and justice. The lines of income and class and race and education and so on. So there's on the one hand, that's a concern, I guess, that we empower people as broadly as possible. The flip side of that, of course, is that technology has also given access, especially if we look globally at the picture globally. Emergent technologies have actually empowered people that were disempowered in the past as well. So there's both sides to that, I think, and I don't really have. I mean, it's something I think about, but my thinking doesn't go very far with it. In that, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how as a church or even as an individual, I can, I could address that, even if it was something I felt called to address, is the inequity or injustice that technology creates. But I certainly identify it as a part of our current society and world, that technology, you've got somebody with their $1,200 iPhone. It's not everybody that's going to be carrying that around in their pocket, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks. This is great to just hear where that all lands in this moment. I guess if I feel like, as I think we both crossed the threshold of being 30 years in ministry. And I'm just wondering, as we imagine what we're leaving behind us, or like what kind of legacy, socially or in terms of faith communities, like what are our, I feel as if this technology is opening us up to allow the next generation to take some leadership. Whether that generation wants to take leadership in church is another question, but somewhere in our society that the leadership is shifting. Do you have any sense of that, and how that relates to the arc of your communication?
Yeah. That's a difficult and huge question, for sure. And I guess, I reflect, my own children are millennial generation children, and I just, what I hear a lot of people in that demographic saying is, you keep talking about passing on the legacy of this Christian denomination to us, and we keep telling you we don't want it. We don't want your legacy. And so I think somehow we have to come to terms with that, that it isn't, we talk about, who will take this on when we're gone. And the answer, tough as it may seem, might be, well, nobody in the way that we're imagining it. Nobody's going to do that. And but what I do think, and again, this may be a bit off our focus here, but I subscribe to a theory of how change happens that was, I think, first came out of the Berkhan Institute in the US, which is called the two-loop theory of change, which essentially says that there's a dominant system that emerges socially, economically, politically. There are these dominant systems that get created by human beings. And they're rather arbitrary, but once they take hold and become established, they're fairly solid. But eventually they decay, and they become unable to sustain and meet the needs of the emerging culture or society. And so they begin to die off. And so you can picture it as kind of an arc that begins and rises and is at a powerful and dominant place as a system. It could be social, economic. The United Church of Canada, certainly in 1965, was at the top of that arc. Tremendous amount of influence socially, politically, economically, spiritually among Canadians. But then that arc starts to fall. So the question is, well, where does change happen? Well, change, I think, primarily occurs by individuals that are part of those systems leaving those systems, stepping outside of those systems, bringing some of the experience with them, but networking and joining and connecting with others in society who are now, or maybe always have been, outsiders of those dominant systems.
Okay.
And so when we connect with those outsiders, they're the innovators of the new system. They're the innovators of it could be a new culture, a new economy, a new which will not be dominant. The dominant system will continue until that emergent system gains strength and numbers and eventually becomes the dominant system. And at some point, that system will begin to decay. And so it's this idea that change happens in that kind of organic way. And there's it's complex, so there's not a lot of ways in which we can control the outcome, but what we can do is we can recognize when there's good stuff happening, good people networking and gathering together, where there's some really brilliant things emerging. And what we can do is recognize that we're on the way out, and we can offer, not to say to them, okay, now you have to now do things the way we've always done them, or here's something to use, but make sure you use it in this way. Rather to just offer the resources that they need to empower them to emerge this new world or this new system. And I think that that's probably the best that we can do. Our generation is to say, look, I was going to spend this money on a new project here at the church. We're going to put in some new stained glass windows and replace them. But you know what? They've got another 20 years left, and then you take this money and do something with it. And in this new thing that you're emerging, and they'll say, well, what do you want us to do with it? And you say, whatever you want. It's up to you. You take this and you create something good. I think that's the best. That's maybe the best that we can be doing right now in some ways. That
sounds fantastic, and it also sounds like as in this giant pause, as many people are calling this, as in the midst of the pause, seeing so many things just coming to the surface that are so impressive, and wanting almost just instinctively to support them. So it's a great frame for decision making as we imagine how to be neighbors to new leaders or new innovators.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
It's,
yeah,
it's
go.
it's complex and it's organic, and so there's not much more you can say about that idea in detail, or you can't really talk about it strategically. It's more a matter of an attitude that you bring to change and how you can participate in change, even if you're still part of that dominant system. Or for some of us, or for some people, it means stepping away from the dominant system. And I often remember this story. I don't know how apocryphal it is, and how since we're talking about technology today, um, I think the story is that when Steve Jobs was at Apple, and they had created the Apple IIe, huge success. It was, at the top of the game. The Apple IIe was one of the major personal computers that broke in. It really broke uh, pioneered the whole idea of personal computing in people's homes beyond the Commodore 64. And so people had Apple IIes, and Steve Jobs had another vision for a totally different kind of computer uh, that was not part of that dominant model. And so, but in order to make that happen, he went a couple miles down the road from the main place where Apple was doing its business, and found an old warehouse and set up a new shop. And he took some of these innovators with him from the old company that were not happy with the Apple IIe anymore, and brought in some new people. And he shared this idea with some other companies. I think Xerox was one of them, and others, and tried to get them to see kind of what the vision was. So there were all these kind of outliers that gathered together a couple of miles down the road from the Apple headquarters, with Steve Jobs then, spearheading that. And they created the Apple Macintosh, and it was a totally different way of thinking about computing. It was visual, it was graphic oriented, it used metaphors of desktop, it had a mouse, like it was just a totally different way of doing it. And I think that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the two loops, talking about that people need to let go of some things and begin to participate in what's emerging. And theologically, where do you think you find God?
Yeah, in the warehouse, I believe.
That's the question for us. Like,
Yeah.
what's God up to, right? Is God up to trying to prop up the existing dominant, elitist institutions, or is God out there with the poor and our First Nations folks and others who are really part of that emergent culture and system? So those are questions that I've been asking myself these days.
Amen. That's great, man. That is a powerful place to sort of it's probably a good place for us to wind up. That's a lovely image of God being, potentially the new hire for whoever Steve Jobs is right now, and figuring out
They're out there.
Yeah.
They're networking. They have names like Greta Thunberg and
yeah, exactly.
Here's a different way of looking at things. Anybody on board with me? Well, it turns out there are a whole lot.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good news. That's good news.
Yeah,
Listen,
yeah.
let me ask you one last question, because one of the ways that you and I connect and have connected down through the years is through music. There's a technology of instruments and sound and voice, and I know you've done music all over the country through the United Church and your own compositions. I love that video you did of Jackson Brown's song. The song's called "For Every Man." It's, yeah. I mean, you really, that's a lovely gift. It's up on YouTube. I put it up at our Facebook group page, and I invite anybody just to take a break and enjoy that song. Can you just say a couple of words as we're kind of coming towards the end here of like where that technology of music fits into all this, or for you right now?
Sure. There's I'll say two very different things. One is just a very technological or a very technical response. The church where I'm serving right now, we're fortunate enough to have a small group of people involved in our music program there who were ready to not stop making music during this time. So they did a little bit of homework and they came up with a piece of technology, a cloud-based technology, and called Soundtrap, and it basically is an online cloud-based digital audio workstation. Like it's an online version of GarageBand, basically. But the way that it works, you can put it on your phone. Just the way that it's interoperable that way. What they are able to do is to send. So the piano player records the bass piano track. He sends this off to the soprano. She sings it. She sends it, forwards it over to the tenor, and they sing their part, and they forward over to a bass, and he sings bass a couple times over just to get a double voice sound on it or whatever it might be. So anyway, they pass this music around, and they produce an 8-part voice piece of music with piano, and they do that for like 3 songs every week, and we put them up as part of our worship service. So they've found a way to continue to be not just to pull out the archives, some previous recordings, but to actually stay active, to stay engaged musically, to create music together. And that's been hugely important for them. It's been hugely important. And then the choir meets together on Zoom on Thursday nights, which is when they always used to meet. Some music has already been created during the week, and they just meet to connect and to share, kind of talk about music a little bit, talk about life and whatever, because they want to maintain those relationships that they have with each other. So I think that's kind of a cool use of technology, being able to produce music, multi-part, multi-person music in the midst of isolation. So that's my one.
Dude, you need to be. I think that makes me think like you need to be coaching us. Somebody like you need to be coaching us on how this. Because even as you describe it, it's like sign me up, or I'll sign. Well, I'm sure somebody in our community and in our neighboring congregations, somebody would jump on that. So thank you.
Yeah, it's a great tool, and the cool thing about it is that these are folks that did not have a whole lot of technical expertise going into this. They were able to figure this out. These are not geeks, these aren't just the techie geeks in the choir. These are just regular choir members who are making this work. So I think that's cool. The second kind of response to your question is, in terms of music, is that I have always, believed that music is both a reflection of culture and a creator of culture. And I think that music, I think it's important that music does continue to play a role in shaping our experience that we're currently in and reflecting the experience that we're currently in. And I see a little bit of that happening, but not as much as I thought there might be. I mean, there's been a few songs written, and there's been certainly groups of musicians who've done some pretty cool things collaboratively, and there's been some concerts created and stuff like that. So it's happening. But I think this is bigger than the pandemic. I saw Michael Moore interviewed by Stephen Colbert a few weeks back. He was saying, this pandemic is nothing. This was Michael Moore talking. It's nothing compared to the environmental crisis that's looming. The environmental crisis that we're going to hit, like in the next very short years, pales compared to having to deal with, a virus. And so I think the bigger issue for us right now, and maybe what this pandemic is bringing to light, is the inappropriateness and the lack of the lack of I don't know what the right word is, the lack of good. I don't know what the word is. Just the lack of rightness and goodness and justice and human well-being, I guess maybe the word I'm looking for. The lack of humanity that's emerged over the last couple of years in the in the right-wing political leadership globally. And so I'm hoping that maybe if some good comes out of this pandemic, it will be to pull the curtain back on the wizards, that are driving the right-wing dictatorial, undemocratic processes and messaging that's emerged over the last couple of years. Wouldn't that be great? And I think that the role, back to music, I think the role of music, it may end up being similar to what it was during the Vietnam War, during the, in the Cold War. And that's why I posted Jackson Browne's tune For Every Man, because it holds out a hope that humanity will come to its senses. It will see through the...
Written in that period, right? Written in the early 70s.
In 1973, during the Vietnam War, yeah, and the Cold War, height of the Cold War. Jackson Browne's song says, I'm waiting for, everybody else is wanting to give up and leave and bail out and go and, give up on the establishment and just bail, basically. He's saying, I have this, through this song, he says, I have some hope that humanity, that we will as a collective come to our senses and we'll turn, wrongs into right and injustice into justice. And I mean, that's essentially what the song is about. Written by this young guy, 25 years old, whatever he was at the time.
Yeah,
amazing.
Yeah.
But that's, to me, that's musically, I'm looking for counterculture music again. I'm looking for, I'm looking for the prophetic voices in the music, whether that's through rap or folk or hip hop or blues, whatever. I'm looking for those voices these days. And
sounds good. All right, Wen. Hey, look, Joe. It's so nice of you. I mean, not nice. It's wonderful that you took this time. And I just, there's so many things you said right now that are planting seeds for me and I think for folks that will be checking this out. So great to see you, my friend.
Thank you very much. And not to be, I know the purpose of your podcast and spending this time is to focus on, a guest and kind of what I might bring to the conversation. But boy, oh boy, I've learned a lot from you over the years, Peter. And so, if there's any claim to having a little tiny bit of wisdom, some of that comes from you, man.
Thank you. All right.
Definitely.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Cool, man. That was great. Thank you. God, you're killing it. You feel
what
good?
do you want to do with all that? Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, do you want to, yes, you will receive an email notification. Hang on. I just hit stop. I just hit stop record. It says, do you want to stop cloud recording? If yes, you'll receive an email.
Yeah.
When the cloud recording is ready. So I'm going to do that.
And you'll download it from the